Well, hello! I am officially a YouTube partner with the ability to monetize my channel, so giving that a try, please like and subscribe. In this video, I will be taking a break from my usual fare to serve up a video on the movie Encanto, brought to you by Disney. I can't overemphasize what a gorgeous movie Encanto is, but I specifically want to talk about the magical realism in Encanto, as I think that this movie is a good vehicle to understand this literary genre and how it is different from the fantasy genre. The description that you get for magical realism if you Google it is that it is a literary story with fantastical elements, or it's a genre of literature popular in Latin America or popularized by Latin America that depicts the real world as having magic in a matter-of-fact way. However, these definitions are confusing to people who have read a wide variety of fantasy. What is literary is debatable, and I could probably do a whole video or a whole video series on that subject. Saying it's set in the real world doesn't really help either, because people get that magical realism is not like Lord of the Rings or a world that you can portal into like Narnia or Fillory from the Magician series, but there are plenty of fantasy stories that are set in the real world. So a fantasy reader might think, oh, like the Dresden Files, and no, magical realism is not like the Dresden Files. It's also not like Twilight or Discovery of Witches. Those are urban fantasies. It's also not a historical fantasy set on Earth in a time and place when magic was accepted more as part of everyday life because of the religion or the culture or the local folklore, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is set in England and involves entanglement with fairies, or the Winter Night trilogy, which is set in Old Rus and involves Russian fairy tales. Now, I should say that I am not an expert scholar in the literary genre of magical realism or anything. I do have a degree in English language arts as well as a master's degree in teaching, and they did cover magical realism as part of my curriculum, but unfortunately my exposure to it is a little bit cursory, which is unfortunate because it is a lovely literary subtype. I actually haven't even read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is often touted as the paragon of this type of literary fiction. But I do think that I understand the genre. My understanding of the magical realism in 100 Years of Solitude is that as a type of exaggeration used to point out the absurdity in the sorts of things that people either unquestionably believe in or take for granted. In magical realism, the magic is mostly used as a literary device for understanding people and human struggles. Encanto's magical realism is a little bit different from 100 Years of Solitude, but it is still used as a literary device. Encanto is also much shorter than 100 Years of Solitude, and it is definitely a lot more fun, so we are going to look at this movie to explain this literary genre and this concept, and also why it's such a wonderful movie. First, for those of you who have not yet seen Encanto, I am going to entice you to watch it by saying that it is not an adventure-style fantasy. I have seen very few reviews or comments from people who do not like this story, but those who do not seem to like it seem to have expected more of an adventure-based story like most of Disney's movies, such as Tangled or even Frozen, and obviously all of the fairy tale-based stories that preceded those. This is more typical of Disney, and it's not what Encanto is. Encanto is an intimate story about family dynamics and generational trauma, in the sense that you witness the effects of something traumatic that happened to the grandmother, the matriarch of the family, that is then passed down to her children and grandchildren, as revealed by their inability to measure up to her expectations, and also to communicate honestly with each other and love one another the way that they want to. You will get to know the Madrigal family throughout the course of the movie. You will see yourself in this family, even if it looks nothing like your family. It's got an extremely universal message and a relatability that is above most Disney movies. You will learn something, you will more importantly feel something about family when you watch this film. And that is kind of the point. That's also as spoiler-free as this video is going to get, so if you haven't seen the movie, you might want to do that first and then return for the analysis. My only recommendation, other than to go into this not expecting an adventure, is to watch the first song with subtitles. It introduces all of the members of the family, but it goes a little bit quickly to catch everything. You will get reintroduced to all of the individual family members and their magical powers later, but it's a nice primer that might help with enjoyment the first time around. So recommendation, turn on the closed captioning, enjoy that first song with subtitles if you have the capability of doing so. So with that introduction out of the way, let's dig into why Encanto is so good, and especially why it is so useful as an example of magical realism. The story follows Mirabel, the only grandchild of the magical Madrigal family not to get a magical gift. The family lives in a magical house at the edge of a town that has grown up around this Madrigal family. The town is surrounded and kept safe by a circular wall of impassable mountains. Each member of the Madrigal family, except for Mirabel, has a magic power of sorts. Mirabel's mother can make food that heals people. Her sister Luisa has super strength. Her other sister Isabella can grow flowers. Aunt Pepa controls the weather. Cousin Antonio can talk to animals. Cousin Dolores hears everything said in the town. Cousin Camilo can shapeshift. And Uncle Bruno sees visions of the future. All of this is made possible by the magical candle that Abuela, the grandmother, calls her miracle. The magic candle came into existence due to the great outpouring of love at the moment that Abuela's husband and the father of her children sacrificed himself to stall these brigands that were chasing them. The candle also caused the mountains to rise around the valley, keeping everyone who lives in safe. Since then, each child of the Madrigal family has been granted a magical gift on the evening they turn 5 years old. Everyone except Mirabel. Now, I would argue that Mirabel does sort of get a gift, but I'm going to disagree with other comments and reviews that I have seen about what the gift is. It's not the ability to talk to the house, casita. Everyone can see that the house is magical, and Abuela also talks to it. I would argue that the gifts that each family member receives are a combination of their personality and some deep desire that they have. I'll go through each of these gifts in a moment. The plot of this movie is that the magical house, the casita, is losing its magic, and so are the family members. But everyone is in denial about it. Cracks are appearing in the foundation, first as visions and then in reality, but the grandmother, Abuela, won't hear a word spoken about what is going on. Mirabel's quest is to save the house by saving the miracle. To do this, she has to find out if the magic really is failing, and if it is, what is causing the magic to fail so that she can fix it. This setup gives Mirabel a lot of agency as a main character. She wants to do this heroic thing for her family because it's the right thing to do, and also because it's personally important to her. As the only family member not to get a magical gift, she understandably feels left out of the family. She desperately wants to prove that she belongs, to be worthy of the name Madrigal. Feeling like you are the only sibling or only family member not to be especially talented is very relatable, so audiences watching this story are immediately invested in Mirabel as a character that they can empathize with and follow on a journey. She wants to do a good thing for other people that will also be good for her. This makes logical sense, and so Mirabel is easy to root for. Now, the way I want to talk about the rest of this movie is through the lens of magical realism. The concept is easier to understand if you look at it grammatically. Magical is the adjective that describes the noun realism. Fantastical realism or exaggerated realism or hyperbolic realism would be close synonyms to the term. In other words, it is not something invented, it is something that is real, unlike a fantasy. In magical realism, the origin or mechanism for how the magic exists is also not usually explained. Here's the best way to think about it. The entire story of Encanto, the entire story, would work exactly the same if there was no magic at all. No magic meaning no magic candle, no semi-sentient house, no magical gifts, no surrealist songs with characters juggling donkeys and flying through the sky on hanging vines. When I say story, I mean the relationships between the characters, the message, and the overall plot would be exactly the same or close enough without any magic. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, you just said that the plot of this movie is about a magical house that is losing its magic and Mirabel has to save it. How can the plot possibly work without magic? And I did say that, but the cracking house is just a metaphor for the family, and the magic, represented by the candle, the origin of which is never explained in the tradition of magical realism, is a metaphor for the love between the family members. The whole point of this movie, the real plot, is that Mirabel has to help the family love each other and be more honest about their anxieties and struggles as imperfect humans living under the shadow of Abuela's trauma at losing her husband. The magic just makes the story more inviting and easier to understand the messages that are being conveyed. Think of the trauma scene this way. Abuela and Pedro leave their previous town with some of the other townspeople to pursue a safer life in the remote mountains. Brigands chase them, and Pedro sacrifices himself so Abuela, their 3 babies, and the other townspeople can make it into the mountains. There is no magic in this story. No magic is needed for this story. That's exactly what we saw happen, just more fantastically. In the realistic version, they run for the mountains while Pedro stands his ground to fight or to distract the brigands and just doesn't follow after. Abuela raises her children in the safety of the mountains, revered by the people her husband died to save, but she never gets over the trauma of having lost him. She can also never return to the river where he died, not because the mountains are magically impassable, but because it brings up too much emotion for her, at least until she has to go in order to save Mirabel, the granddaughter she nearly throws away in the movie after Pedro sacrificed himself so that Mirabel's could be born. You don't need magic to tell this story. The magic is just a vehicle to make it easier to tell the story and to make it more interesting and a little bit more lighthearted and enchanted than the actual real story is. The magical gifts are also metaphors. Every character in this story can be understood perfectly with or without their magical gift. Let's start with Cousin Dolores, who is the person Mirabel starts with to solve the mystery of the miracle. Dolores hears everything. Basically, Dolores is the town gossip. She's a nice gossip, though. She has trouble sharing her own feelings and opinions, which is artistically represented by her whispering everything. Because she's so self-effacing, a lot of people confide in her, and she just keeps it all in, all the secrets, even her own. Like all the other characters, she is cracking under the expectation that she must continue in this vein forever rather than grow into the person she's really supposed to be. Dolores' resolution at the end of the story is to confess to Mariano that she has fallen in love with his quiet sensitivity from afar and would make a much better match for him than Isabella. See? The magic, the hearing everything, it's metaphorical. You don't need it. Next we have Luisa. Mirabel's sister Luisa is super strong. Do I need to explain that physical strength is not a magical trait? If you take away the exaggerated examples of shifting houses and churches on their foundations and juggling donkeys, you just get a person who is physically stronger and taller than other people and expected to do all of the hard labor around the house. Luisa also struggles with the responsibility of being the oldest child and constantly worries that she's going to mess up, to show weakness, and that something will threaten the family that she can't stop. The song Surface Pressure articulates Luisa's anxieties really well. She's also aware of her insecurities. She even tries to tell Abuela about them, but retracts her statement when Abuela looks at her with horror. Then there's Uncle Bruno. And I know that we're not supposed to talk about Bruno, but we're gonna talk about Bruno. Bruno's magical gift is to see the future. 10 years ago, he had a vision of Mirabel and the house cracking and disappeared. In reality, I think Uncle Bruno has a mental health disorder, specifically an anxiety disorder and possibly OCD. When I say OCD, I don't mean that he likes things perfectly arranged. I mean the clinical definition of obsessive compulsive disorder, which is where people engage in obsessive thinking and repetitive behaviors in order to try to prevent some kind of bad future from happening. Some people with this disorder think that their thoughts can control reality, and they compulse as a way to control their fear and outcomes. In the show, Bruno throws salt over his shoulder and knocks on wood. These are superstitions, but they could be interpreted as compulsions. We also see that Bruno has withdrawn from the family and living within the walls of the house. In a more realistic interpretation, Bruno would be that shut-in family member who always stays in his room or is asked to stay out of the way when there's company because his mental illness is embarrassing to Abuela and the rest of the family. It's really awful that Abuela associates people as their gifts in this context because it means that Abuela sees the person Bruno as inseparable from his anxiety disorder. Again, no magic is needed to understand this. Bruno is fortunately accepted by Mirabel, the other outcast of the family, and then is welcomed back into the family by Abuela as well as by his siblings at the end of the movie. Next, we have Isabella, Mirabel's sister. These two do not get along, at least initially, and I highly recommend watching this movie and noting all of Mirabel's facial expressions every time Isabella is in the room, especially if there's some kind of a spotlight on her, which is usually a literal spotlight. Isabella is the perfect golden child. She's the one that Abuela never has to worry about, the one who is expected to start the next generation of magical madrigals. Isabella plays this part, but it's an act. This is why she reacts with fury when Mirabel calls her selfish when she goes to apologize for ruining Isabella's engagement with Mariano. Isabella confesses in this scene that she doesn't want to marry Mariano. She's only doing it because she's that golden child that Abuela expects to carry the family traditions. Isabella's magical power is to grow flowers. Realistically, this might just be an affinity for plants, like maybe she has a green thumb, but I actually think that Isabella is meant to be interpreted as an artist. I think that in the realistic understanding of the story, Isabella paints flowers. She does not grow flowers. She is a talented painter, and all of her pictures are pretty landscapes, pretty gardens, and she hates it. Her solo is about her realizing that she could do more, that she wants to do more, that she is, quote, sick of pretty, she wants something true. The swapping of roses for carnivorous plants, hanging vines, strangling figs, and jacarundas is Isabella's way of saying that she wants to paint something that feels ugly when she's feeling ugly feelings instead of just doing the pretty pictures that Abuela wants. You see all of this in the explosion of color in her song. Her dress is ruined, and she and Mirabel come to an understanding and love for each other by the end of the song. This also brightens the candle and heals the cracks in the walls, but when Abuela comes and sees it, she doesn't understand and a fight ensues. Now, before we get to the end of this movie, I want to go through a few more characters who have gifts but who do not have songs. So, Mirabel's mother heals people with food. Does this need any explanation as to why it's not really magical? I think this describes most loving mothers. Mirabel's Aunt Pepa, her mother's sister, is moody. Her gift is to control the weather, but you could interpret weather as just the way any room feels when Pepa is in it, based on the strength of her passions and what kind of mood she is in. By the way, I love Aunt Pepa, and I especially love how her husband Felix just absolutely adores her in every frame of this movie. We don't get a lot of character development for Felix separately, but there is so much information about all of the side characters when you're paying attention to what's happening in the background of every scene. Felix is clearly a romantic gentleman who just lives to be attentive, and Pepa is perfect for him because she needs a lot of attending. Felix is very accepting of Pepa for who she is, and he actually wants her to stop forcing herself to be sunny all the time. We get this also from the lyrics that Bruno sings at the end of the movie. He says, "Let it rain, let it snow, let it go," and Felix echoes, "That's what I've been saying, bro." We also don't get to see Antonio or Camila as much in the movie because they don't get solos for their songs, but we do know that Antonio is shy and prefers the company of animals to people. Camila is the opposite of both Antonio and his sister Dolores. He's the attention-seeking middle child and a bit of a jokester. He does impressions. He's shown to be charismatic and helpful, but also probably a little bit lonely and insecure in himself deep down. I can easily imagine what a song for Camilo would be like. The real-life equivalent of shape-shifting is presenting yourself as whatever other people want you to be in order to earn their approval and friendship. That could make a really great song. So, those are all of the magical gifts of the Madrigals. Basically, all of the gifts are just human personality traits or something adjacent to personality. They're all realistic, just highly exaggerated. That's what makes this genre more literary than a fantasy. Now let's talk about Mirabel's gift. Mirabel's personality is optimistic and empathetic. She loves all the members of her family. She's also more sensitive and observant of their insecurities than other people in the household. When she turned 5, Abuela told Mirabel about the magic candle and asked if she would use her gift to help the family. That's the opening scene of the movie. In my headcanon, when Mirabel puts her hand on the doorknob, she is wishing to be of the greatest service possible to the family. Casita, the house, knows that the foundation of the family is starting to crack, and the only way to fix the problem is to take it down to the studs so a new foundation can be laid. Again, this is a metaphor for the love of the family members, not an actual house. This is because Abuela never fully processed her grief over Pedro, and everyone is tiptoeing around her all the time. She has been passing the trauma she experienced onto her children and their children, extending the burden to them. Abuela and Pedro left their old house with that room that shows the 3 cribs for 3 babies in order to save what mattered, themselves and their children. But over the years, Abuela has been obsessing about the new house, the house, and forgetting what the miracle was for, which is the people that live there. Abuela's revelation at the end of the movie is to remember that the real miracle is the people, her children that are alive today because of Pedro's sacrifice. They left their house and the town to survive. Because of Pedro's great sacrifice and Abuela's great love for him, the universe rewarded Abuela with a new home for her surviving family to be safe. The miracle is not a candle. It's the love between the family members that are alive today because of what happened. In my opinion, Mirabel's gift is to be the miracle. Mirabel loves her family, and she will do anything, including being honest enough to air out all of these grievances that the family has been carrying in order to save the family. The name Mirabel means wondrous, and miracle is also defined as a great wonder. Both of these words have the same etymology, so Mirabel is literally a miracle. The movie explains this really plainly. Abuela says that she asked for a miracle and Pedro sent her Mirabel. Mirabel not getting some other gift is what led to her wanting to solve the mystery of the cracks in the first place, which reignites the love in the family and ultimately is the miracle. So Mirabel's gift, that in quotations, gift, is the ability to restore the magic or to restore the love of the family using her optimism and empathy. She is a miracle, but it's realistic. It's also important to note how the miracle was saved. After reconnecting with Isabella and being blamed for Abuela for the state of Isabella's dress and also the house, Mirabel tells Abuela the truth. The foundation is breaking because of her. This breaks the house completely. But it was necessary. This honesty between family members hurts. At first it hurts, but it also leads to transformation. Mirabel runs away and Abuela has a revelation. She chases after Mirabel and finds her and tells her that she was right. She expresses the grief that she has been carrying all these years, finally processing it. In turn, Mirabel forgives Abuela, expressing empathy, sympathy, and admiration toward her grandmother for how she saved the family and how much she has suffered for the family all of these years. Nothing Abuela did was with intention to hurt anyone, especially not her children or her grandchildren. Like everyone else with the solo, Luisa, Isabella, and Bruno, Abuela was carrying too much, worrying too much, and expecting too much. She's not a villain. She just needed to process her pain in order to undergo a transformation and love her family for who they are and not what they stand for. This theme of transformation is threaded throughout the whole movie. We see it metaphorically conveyed through the motif of butterflies, which are everywhere, including on Mirabel's blouse, in a swarm at the end of the movie, and in the stones of the new home as it is being built. The song Dos Oruguitas, or Two Caterpillars, elaborates on this metaphor of transformation. This is Abuela's song of love, suffering, destruction, and rebirth, and it's thematic for the whole movie. I don't understand the Spanish, but it repeats in English during the credits, and it's beautiful and heartrending in both versions. In the denouement, Abuela, Mirabel, and Bruno return to the house, which has been utterly demolished, but it's just a house. Mirabel has been found. Bruno has been found and welcomed back by the whole family. Abuela apologizes to all of her family members for seeing their gifts more than she saw them. The townspeople then show up to help them rebuild the house. And when it's time for the last piece, the doorknob, Mirabel is asked to do the honors. Of course, this is a replay of the scene where Mirabel did not get a gift as a child at the beginning of the movie. But in a way, she did get a gift. She has been carrying it this whole time. She is the miracle. So when she puts the doorknob in place, the magic is restored. In the last scene, the family takes a photo in front of their new magical house with Mirabel in the center, the foundation of love restored. There's a photo also taken at the beginning of the movie after Antonio gets his gift, but Mirabel was left out and no one noticed. This is what sets the house cracking. That photo was technically perfect, but the family it captures was posing. They are actually a broken, anxious mess. In contrast, the photo at the end of the story is made blurry by the house making the floor tiles surge up to force the family closer to each other, and although blurry, it's a better photo because it captures the true family loving each other in the way that they were always meant to. Roll credits to the happiest song ever written. That's the movie Encanto. I honestly can't get enough of this movie. I was already a fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda, but this soundtrack might be his best. There is so much exquisite detail in the artwork too. The representation of Colombia, from the plants to the clothes to the people, is just arresting. Even the background characters all feel like real people. The actors are wonderful too. What's incredible is just how passionate every aspect of this film is, how everyone involved seems to be in sync about what this story is about and why they are telling it. It's really just, it's a lovely film. If you haven't seen it yet and watched this whole video in spite of not having seen it, I highly, highly recommend it. It's available on Disney Plus, and you can also rent it on Amazon Prime. I haven't watched the bonus content yet, but that may be worth it because of the cultural richness and literary merit that this story has. You can also get the soundtrack on Amazon Music if you have that. It might be free right now. If you have seen Encanto, I hope you watch it again and enjoy it more because of this video. I also hope that this video helps you understand magical realism and appreciate it as a literary genre. If you enjoyed this, please let me know in the comments below. I am relatively new to YouTube and I'm figuring things out in terms of what I want this channel to be. I am also newly approved to monetize my channel, so We'll see if this can become something more than just a pastime in the future that I do on weekends when we're in a pandemic. As always, please like, please subscribe if you have not already, and cheers! Until next time.